Before Winston Churchill became the bulldog face of Britain's resistance, he was a difficult boy born inside privilege but never fully at ease within it. He came into the world on November 30th, 1874, at Blenheim Palace, the grandson of aristocratic power and the son of Lord Randolph Churchill, a rising Tory politician, and Jenny Jerome, an American mother whose glamour and energy shaped the family's image. From the outside, this looked like the perfect beginning for a statesman, but Churchill's early life carried a different emotional truth. He was not formed by easy confidence. He was formed by distance, hunger for approval, and the need to prove that birth alone would not be enough. Britannica notes that his family background linked him directly to the Duke of Marlborough, while both Britannica and Britannica Kids record that he was educated at Harrow and then Sandhurst after a weak academic record pushed him toward the army. That beginning matters because Churchill's later image can make him seem inevitable. He was not inevitable. As a boy, he was often treated as a problem rather than a prodigy. He struggled in school, frustrated his father, and developed early the feeling that he would have to force the world to take him seriously. Yet that same insecurity created one of the deepest engines of his life. Churchill did not merely want success. He wanted vindication. He wanted to become too large to dismiss. Harrow and Sandhurst gave him discipline, but they also gave him something else. A stage on which he could begin converting restless ambition into identity. The future orator of war was, at first, a young man learning how to turn weakness in one arena into relentless effort in another. Churchill's real self-construction began through action. In 1895, he entered the British Army, and from there his early life became a series of adventures designed not just to serve empire, but to make a name. He was a cavalry officer, war correspondent, escape artist, and self-promoter all at once. He served in Cuba, India, Sudan, and South Africa, and unlike politicians who entered public life through quiet apprenticeship, Churchill arrived with a personal mythology already taking shape. Britannica Kids notes that he entered the British Army in 1895, while Nobel's facts page confirms that after a brief army career he became a Conservative MP in 1900. These details matter because Churchill's path was not simply aristocratic drift into Parliament. He used war and writing as a ladder. He learned early that courage alone was not enough. It had to be narrated, published, and turned into public force. This phase of Churchill's life reveals the core pattern that would later make him so formidable. He was never only a man of ideas and never only a man of action. He was a man who fused action into narrative. He wrote books and dispatches, built celebrity from danger, and entered the House of Commons in 1900 already carrying the aura of someone who had lived dramatically. That is why his rise in the early 20th century felt so stormy. He moved through high office quickly, shifted parties, made enemies, and gained a reputation for brilliance mixed with volatility. He was not trusted in a calm, ordinary way. He was watched. He was argued over. He was too energetic, too verbal, too theatrical, too convinced that history was a field in which he belonged. Britannica describes his pre-war rise as sensational and notes that his judgment during World War I later damaged his reputation badly. That combination is essential to the story. Churchill's early climb did not lead in a straight line to greatness. It led first to exposure, risk, and humiliation. If Churchill had died before 1940, history might have remembered him as a gifted, erratic, overconfident statesman whose ambition outran his judgment. That possibility is what makes the middle act of his life so important. During World War I, as First Lord of the Admiralty, he played a major role in preparing the Royal Navy, but he was also associated with the failed Gallipoli campaign. which damaged him deeply. Britannica Kid says plainly that he planned attacks that failed and for a time went back into the army. That humiliation mattered because it pushed Churchill into one of the defining experiences of his life: exile from power without disappearance from politics. He did not collapse, he endured. He kept writing, speaking, and returning, even while many in the establishment treated him as politically suspect. The 1930s became Churchill's wilderness years, and they are one of the great keys to understanding him. While much of British political life drifted toward appeasement, Churchill increasingly positioned himself as the man warning against Nazi danger. Britannica describes him as a lonely figure until Hitler's challenge brought him into national leadership. This is where Churchill's long, difficult career suddenly becomes coherent. All the things that had once made him seem excessive, his love of action, his appetite for language, his historic imagination, his refusal to sound moderate when he believed danger was real, became assets in a world moving toward catastrophe. He had spent years seeming too dramatic for peacetime. War made him legible. This is the emotional hinge of his life. Churchill was not a smooth institutional climber who steadily earned trust. He was a man who spent much of his career out of fashion until the crisis arrived that seemed made for him. That does not mean he was always right. It means his peculiar political temperament, restless, historical, defiant, almost romantic in its appetite for destiny, was uniquely suited to moments when ordinary caution collapsed. By 1939, when Britain declared war on Germany and Churchill returned to the Admiralty, the signal famously went out to the fleet: "Winston is back." That line, preserved in Britannica's World War II leadership section, carries more than administrative meaning. It signals the return of a man history had not finished with. In May 1940, Churchill became Prime Minister and Minister of Defense at the precise moment Britain seemed closest to disaster. France was collapsing. Nazi power looked unstoppable. Britain stood on the edge between humiliation and resistance. This was the hour that transformed Churchill from controversial politician into national symbol. Britannica states that as Prime Minister from 1940 to 1945, he rallied the British people and led the country from the brink of defeat to victory. Nobel's Facts page confirms the same timeline and offices. But those facts alone do not explain what actually happened. Churchill did not save Britain through policy alone. He helped save it through language. He gave fear a voice that did not surrender to fear. He turned speeches into acts of morale, and in doing so made words feel like part of national defense. What made Churchill extraordinary in war was not that he pretended danger did not exist. It was that he named danger in full and then insisted that Britain could still answer it. This is harder than optimism. Optimism can be cheap. Churchill's wartime power came from the opposite quality. He made sacrifice sound meaningful. He was able to speak in a way that linked suffering to national purpose, loss to endurance, and endurance to victory. Britannica's war leadership section describes him as a patriot, a romantic believer in Britain's greatness, and a statesman who seemed to have been preparing all his faculties for the salvation of Britain. That description is almost too perfect, but it captures the essential truth. Churchill's whole life suddenly looked like preparation for a single hour. Yet even this peak should not be flattened into legend alone. Churchill was also a strategist, coalition leader, and international actor navigating Roosevelt, Stalin, empire, bombing, public morale, and the brutal realities of total war. He shaped Allied strategy and, as Britannica notes, later warned the West about the Soviet threat after the alliance broke down. But the reason he remains larger than many wartime leaders is that he combined statecraft with symbolic command. He did not simply govern Britain in war. He embodied the refusal to collapse. That is why the Churchill of 1940-45 became more than prime minister. He became a type, the leader who seems born late in life by the arrival of crisis. Churchill's story did not end with victory, and that makes it richer. In 1945, after leading Britain through war, he lost the general election. The nation he had helped save did not keep him in office in peacetime. This is one of the great correctives to heroic mythology. Churchill was indispensable in war, but democracy did not confuse wartime greatness with permanent entitlement. He later returned as prime minister from 1951 to 1955, but the second term never carried the same mythic charge. The true Churchill legend had already been fixed in the crucible of 1940. Britannica notes this second premiership, and Nobel's facts page confirms it as well. What makes his later life striking is that Churchill was never only a war leader. He was also a writer, historian, and maker of memory. In 1953, he received the Nobel Prize in Literature, and Nobel's own description emphasizes both his historical and biographical writing and his brilliant oratory. This matters because Churchill did not merely live through history. He narrated it. He spent much of his life turning experience into prose, action into memory, and politics into historical drama. The same man who fought for power also fought to control how his age would be remembered. That is part of why his legacy remains so unusually large. He did not leave behind only decisions. He left behind an interpretation of his own century. Churchill died in 1965, by then a global monument rather than just a British politician. But his life endures because it carries a pattern people recognize instinctively. He was the privileged boy who felt underestimated, the adventurer who turned danger into identity, the politician who became notorious before he became essential, the exile from power who turned crisis into destiny, and the old lion whose voice seemed to hold a nation together when steel alone was not enough. He was flawed, often wrong, and capable of grave imperial blind spots. But he was also one of the rare figures whose strengths became most visible when history reached its ugliest edge. In the end, Winston Churchill did not simply inherit greatness. He fought, wrote, failed, warned, waited, and spoke his way into it. That is why he still matters. He was not the smooth product of aristocratic certainty. He was the man who turned insecurity into force, force into language, and language into national endurance. Before Churchill became the voice of Britain's survival, he first had to become the kind of man who could survive being doubted long enough for history to need him.